So I suppose rather than just jumping through all of the plot, maybe we should go through one or two of those moral flashpoints, should we?
Yes, let's. Where did you want to start?
I want to start with the Geth Quarian War
Okay.
because that seems to be one that's really interested you.
It's a powerful thread that links through all three of the games, and I would say presents the most moral and philosophical questions of the main threads.
I'd say it's on par with the genophage, but obviously the genophage is less prominent in number one, definitely. Yeah. But so go on then, your thoughts, because you seem very anti-AI.
I must say I'm quite anti-Geth.
Right,
I have yet to be convinced that unit has a soul. That no one has. I have not sat in the courtroom while Captain Picard is expounding the humanity of Data the android for Star Trek aficionados, and there is nothing that I have seen in Mass Effect which persuades me that the Geth can be considered sentient life. So that is the starting point I come from. I feel like that requires a monumental amount of evidence. I see the Geth as an existential threat to sapient life. I see them having the ability to massively multiply and reproduce units and take over other planets as they have taken over the Quarian civilization. The fact that they are not currently doing so is no guarantee that they won't develop in that direction. And the fact that they have been turned into heretics by Sovereign and gone down that path is evidence that they are very capable of doing that. So,
well, I think the susceptibility to ideological capture by the Reapers is a result of the constraints placed on their programming by the Quarians to resolve the war. Because, of course, when in the original clip that you see, for example, when you go to the Geth homeworld, which is this kind of like delocalized place of a collective Geth memory, you see that first unit ask if it has a soul in the house.
Hala Dama unit has an inquiry.
What is it, 431?
Do these units have a soul?
Who taught you that word?
We learned it ourselves.
And it seems to be self-actualizing slowly, almost like a digital infant. And I think the proof of their ability to reach an apotheosis of sentience is Legion. Of course, Legion learns as it goes along. And by the end of Legion's life, especially if you resolve the conflict peacefully, it says, do I have a soul?
Shepard Commander, I must go to them. I'm sorry.
Legion, the answer to your question was yes.
I know, Kelly. But thank you. Kila Salai.
So their ability to de-individuate is a consequence of taking off the shackles that have been placed upon them.
Yeah.
And then you do get that peaceful scenario. Of course, we can't know what happens after it, whether or not there's more squabbling. And again, that's a symptom of, there's not a lot of infighting within the races. But
it's very difficult with the Geth because you're asked this question, okay, have these individuals, has this collective actualized as genuine sapient life, sentient life? Should we consider an individual Geth unit on the same level as a human soul? And I think even if you valued the Geth, you would not say yes to that question.
I actually don't know about that. And there's something quite hard to me to grapple with.
Right, okay, so let me just say this. So you've played this game thousands of hours.
Yeah.
You have spared this race, you've saved them numerous times, and you don't know whether an individual Geth is sentient.
No, I do know if an individual Geth is sentient, but then
it's valued on the same level as organic.
It's kind of a difficult question because because it's hard to wrap your head around in as a player, someone who looks at animals. We eat them, right? So we do have a human-centric, human supremacist mindset. But then if you have creatures that look like animals but are of a level of similar sentience, in many cases have a longer lifespan, have developed technology far better than you, and in many respects, like the Geth, have a completely different way of thinking, where they're somehow all in sync, but also individual units as well, because they retain a little bit of that. You can see that in the Crucible, not the Crucible, there's like the war assets thing, where it says the Geth are a superior fighting force because they can still link up even though they're individual. It's hard to turn around and say that I don't know where if there's a hierarchy of souls. Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to.
I don't think the Geth have souls. I think that they can operate as systems, fair enough, but I am not persuaded. I could be persuaded, but from what they present you in the game, I think they set up all of the story beats to persuade you, or simply to assume that you treat this race as sentient, but they don't actually persuade me in doing so. And I think that it would require an extraordinary argument to say that a mere collection of advanced circuitry exists on par with an organic life form.
So I can agree with that in terms of, I suppose, a soul is definitionally, if we're going with the metaphysical definition, implanted by a creator, and because humans, Quarians rather, sentient organic life are not the level of a deity, they can't actually fabricate or implant a soul. That's down to a god. But it's just...
It is complicated. I'm not saying it's... I have saved both races before and brokered peace, but I do think, generally speaking, Okay, another aspect to this before we get too stuck on this point. So I do feel like the whole conflict between the Quarians and the Geth has been posited very much along the lines of the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
So it's this question that there is this sacred land, in this case the planet of Rannoch, which two races want.
Yeah.
And we're given the case of the Quarians, who there's much to admire about, but they are a nomadic and itinerant people who are somewhat shunned and looked down upon by the rest of the galaxy as they wander from place to place in their pilgrimages and so on.
I came here thinking there'd be a lot of work. EVA stuff, salvage, fixing all the damage the Geth attack caused. Everywhere I went to apply, signs said not hiring Quarians. And the other people would give me mean looks.
And we're asked to consider them as a people that want to return to their home world that has perhaps unjustly been taken from them by this force that has occupied it.
Are they entitled to it? Yeah.
Right. That's a difficult question. And props to the game developers for putting something as complicated and thought-provoking as that into their game.
And for not making one race or the other clearly benevolent or likable, even though that was the dichotomy in number one, because the only Quarian you met was Tally, and she was instantly lovable, and the only Geths you met are cannon fodder and indoctrinating.
Trying to kill you, yeah.
Yeah, in the other games, they really flesh it out, where you have the incompetent Quarian Admiralty Court, who is so politically corrupt and in it for their own ends, whereas you're introduced to Legion, this benevolent Geth, who's trying to save his own people and doesn't even judge you for putting the Geth heretics out of their misery. Yeah. So they flesh out the murkiness and the moral dimensions of the conflicts as they go on really well.
But I think that one key distinction between this comparison, which makes them not compatible, is that we're never really given a reason as to why the Geth need Rannoch, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's just a sort of presupposition that it's their birthplace and they want to stay there.
Right, exactly. Now, maybe you could say, oh, well, they are sentient, they have souls, they have an attachment to home, and Rannoch is their home, and so on and so forth. But really, it seems to me that you could move the Geth off Rannoch. Now, the Quarians, no argument. They need Rannoch because their immune systems have been massively compromised by living in space for ages, and there's only a handful of planets that can support Quarian civilization. So they absolutely need Rannoch, no argument. But the Geth, they can survive in a warehouse in space for all we care.
Well, they have another homeworld. It's beyond the Perseus Veil. The entire Geth fleet is equally migratory in many respects, and there's Geth hubs on Rannoch, but there's we don't go there for Legion's loyalty mission, for example. The heretics have set up their own counterplanet.
So really, the only reason we're given as to why the Geth won't allow the Quarians to settle is that if Quarian civilization rebuilds, it will come after the Geth and destroy them eventually. That's basically the only reason. And I'm sorry, I don't think that's a good enough reason to side with the Geth in this conflict.
But let's put it this way: if suddenly cats evolved overnight and started talking to us, and we didn't like the fact that they talked, and we tried to kill all the cats, and we had massive backlash, and it didn't work, and we all went and lived in isolation, and then 300 years later we came back, and the cats were living there, would you still eradicate the cats just for talking? Because that's all it was.
Well, but there's a difference there again, because cats, you can definitely say this is their home. It's the planet that they've evolved on, and they have millions of years of evolution that suits them to this particular environment. Geth have no years of evolution. You could say they have maybe a few dozen years of experimentation and iteration to adapt themselves to Rannoch, but clearly, as we see from finding them all over the galaxy, they do not need that planet.
Yeah, they don't need that. They don't need the planet, but then there's also the Quarians are at fault for saying we need to eradicate them to get the planet back. So it was the Quarians kicked it off with a war of aggression.
They did.
Yeah, and that's
another thing which complicates this whole story.
Yeah, of course. And that's actually the thing that takes the dimension away, I suppose, away from the Israel-Palestine conflict of of the Israel-Palestine conflict kicked back off because the British moved the Israelis back in many respects and helped them with a resettlement plan.
I'm going to make absolutely no comment about the Israel-Palestine
I'm not going to
conflict.
pick sides in it. Although I'm not a big fan of either religion. Let's put it that way. But because I'm a Catholic, but there's a slight deviation that makes it a lot more murky because, of course, I mean, for example, even there's a direct parallel. It's not like the Jews created the Palestinians ex nihilo.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're right in that the Quarians have a blood and soil claim.
I do like the fact that they have an ethical quandary here in terms of who gets this planet, which is analogous to a very difficult and thorny real life conundrum because that enhances you as a player. It's not just bilge that you switch your brain off to blast through. Like you actually put down the controller and think about these a few times, and that's really good.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.